Hey, back to classical Hollywood cinema. We were talking about a strong sense of closure. You've probably all seen a film that leaves you sort of up in the air. Everything isn't satisfied for you. You don't know what's going on. You probably have enough to finish the particular narrative arc of a film, but there may be some things left up in the air just to keep you wondering. Typically, audiences don't particularly enjoy that. At least mainstream audiences don't. They want everything to be tied up by the end of the film. As I've mentioned to classes for a long time, when a few years back, my wife and I went out, and our babysitter was an ex-student of mine, and she was really kind of a loud person, and we came back, and she said, "McAllister." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I watched No Country for Old Men. What the hell?" Because that's a film that kind of leaves you in a lurch, not knowing exactly why it ends the way it ends. And so we had to talk about that. But a lot of times people don't like a strong sense of closure, or excuse me, don't like a weak sense of closure. They want it to know what happened. They want it all to end. Um, anyway, okay. So strong sense of closure. So that's the narrative. That's the shape of the stories that are told. What is the narration? How does the narration do things? How is the story told? Number one, generally speaking, the narration is omniscient in the sense that you know a lot. You know a lot more than a lot of characters know. Okay, that's one thing. Two, it's generally objective. Generally, you have a realistic story world that is created, and the narrative is kind of objective. Um, and you don't have a lot of bursts into fantasy for the most part. Okay, sometimes you do, but that's really not the kind of mainstream films we're talking about. But it's pretty much an objective world. Okay, you know what the world is and how it works. It's generally invisible. And this is important because this takes us to the style of editing, continuity editing, which we talked about back with the PowerPoint a while back. The kind of editing whose job it is to hide the fact that you're watching a film. You don't want to notice the edits. You don't want to notice the changes in shot scale, the camera movements, and so on. All you want to get is the story. Okay, so the narration in these films tends to be invisible, so you don't notice it. All you get is the story. All right, even though you're looking at a very, very artificial construct, the film itself. And the narration also tends to be very, very communicative in the sense that, again, they want you to be able to understand this, and so they're trying to give you a lot of information. And there are lots of examples I could show you of giving you information that is important in a narrative sense, so that you have it. Whether you know what to do with it is a different issue. And in this clip you're going to watch from Bringing Up Baby, which is actually something you've actually seen, part of it, you're going to hear this phrase, intercostal clavicle, repeated again and again. It's a bone from a dinosaur. Not really important that you know where it is or what it fits, or what it is rather, or where it fits, but that it is something that they didn't have and now they have. So anyway, it's part of the cause and effect nature of the clip. So in terms of visual style, we have continuity editing. That is a staple of this kind of filmmaking. Centered camera work, in the sense that very, very rarely will you be asked to look elsewhere in a frame than the center. And not only that, very rarely will you be asked to will you be asked to look at two things in the frame at once. That is to say, something in the center, something not in the center. We saw some of that in The Great Train Robbery, but it's pretty much it has become a convention in film by the point we're talking about, that it's not something that you really do. You just show one thing for people to see and let them look at that. You don't really ask them to sort of divide their attention around the frame and chase it around and try to figure out what they're supposed to be looking at. And then expressive mise-en-scène. Okay, we talked about how mise-en-scène is always, it's chosen, it's deliberate, it's rhetorical, and it's expressive. It can be very pedestrian, it can be very day-to-day. Speaking of pedestrian mise-en-scène, you guys are probably getting tired of looking at this black hoodie, the way it goes. At least I wash it now and again. Yeah, the mise-en-scène tends to be very expressive and reinforces the notion of the story. All right, so at this point you should go to the Bringing Up Baby clip that I've provided you a link to and watch it. You saw the beginning of this in our lecture on Chalk Talk a while back. where David Huxley, the scientist, has to go meet with Mr. Peabody and play golf with him to chat him up so that he gets money to restore the dinosaur. Okay, so this is an example of cause and effect and character goals. Huxley wants funding money to continue his work and to continue to build the dinosaur with Alice, whom he's about to marry. Okay. What I didn't show you is the second part of this clip. I'm asking you to watch the first 9 minutes of this film, and I've given you a link to that. And that's the point where he actually goes and he plays golf, and he goes and he plays golf, and he is taken off course by an errant shot, and then he gets involved with a young woman who is specifically and conspicuously very different from Alice. Okay, very different from Alice. So that's part of what you're looking for is the nature of the characters, because we know these characters. If you recall, David is kind of a a little bit of a bumbler, kind of a goofy, absent-minded professor. That's what you're looking for, absent-minded professor. Alice is very severe, very businesslike, and and offers him, is very clear about offering him a life with essentially no fun in it. They're just going to build a dinosaur. And the woman he meets on the golf course is very, very different. So, conflicting goals. There you have it. She wants to have a good time. He wants to play a game of golf for a purpose. And we go from there as they continue to sort of get tangled up in one another. So, anyway, you'll see the traits of classical Hollywood cinema in this clip. You'll see the narrative, the kind of story it is, the way it's told, and the visual style, the continuity editing, and so on. You'll notice, for instance, when you're on the golf course with David Huxley, that as he is drawn farther and farther and farther from what he's there to do, that is to say, chat up Mr. Peabody, the shot scale changes as he shouts back to Mr. Peabody, "I'll be with you in a minute, Mr. Peabody." When he first does that, it's kind of a medium long shot with Mr. Peabody, and then Mr. Peabody, as they show him again, gets smaller and smaller and smaller on the horizon as David is drawn farther and farther away from both his golf game with Mr. Peabody and, metaphorically, his goals of becoming friendly with the guy. Okay, so take a look at that clip, and yeah, and then come back. Okay, the other clip I wanted to show you was primarily to show you that this kind of thing endures. This classical Hollywood cinema idea endures, even though the codification of it, the research sample of it takes place or was drawn from between 1931 and 1948. It continues in the vast majority of film and televisual programming. So you can really pick up on this, and I'm going to have to see if I can send you this clip or post it on Blackboard, because I can't send you to any online source for it. But if I do, I'll give you an email and tell you what it's all about. It's a clip from Viva Las Vegas, which is an Elvis film, and it's very, very communicative, follows the same kind of pattern. But let me say, in the meantime, what I would like you to do this week. Obviously, keep reading. That's one thing. Two, I'd like you to see 2 films. Please see 2 films that are really interesting in terms of this classical Hollywood cinema idea. The 2 films are Casablanca and Citizen Kane. And the significance of this pairing is that Casablanca will follow the classical Hollywood paradigm very closely. Okay, you'll understand the characters, you'll understand who they are, what their motives are, what they're like, and then the conflicting goals of those characters will put them into motion. And narrative events in the film will result from those conflicts. And that is a film with a very strong sense of closure. So it is probably the finest example of this classical Hollywood cinema idea. Citizen Kane, by contrast, is the product of a filmmaker who was not interested at all in replicating that formula. One could argue that he didn't know what he was doing enough to replicate that formula. Orson Welles was a filmmaking novice when he made Citizen Kane. He had been a radio producer. He was certainly a skilled storyteller, but he chose to make a film in a very, very unconventional and aberrant style that doesn't have a strict linear chronology and has kind of a recursive structure in the sense that it keeps going back and filling in different parts of the past, but you never get the whole thing presented in order. So you need to find those two films on streaming services. They're out there. I think Casablanca's can be had for a couple of bucks, and Citizen Kane will cost you $4. It's a bargain. Anyway, but see those two films and think about how they exemplify or do not exemplify the classical Hollywood cinema ideas. I will also suggest, just for yucks, a couple of films that are very, very entertaining and also play around with the notion of storytelling and play around with the notion of narrative and are self-reflexive in the sense that they sort of draw attention to the ways that they are telling the story instead of just keeping it all invisible and letting you absorb the story. Those two films are listed on the notes. Those are The Princess Bride from 1987 by Rob Reiner, directed by Rob Reiner, and Shakespeare in Love, which was directed by John Madden, and that's from the director, not the football coach, in 1998. Both of these are stories that are films that play around with the notion of story, interrupt the process, get back to the narrative rhythm of things, and so on, in very, very charming ways and very, very entertaining ways. And you would even call Shakespeare in Love, I think, a kind of a love letter to the idea of storytelling and narrative and why we continually seek it out and why we enjoy it so much. Anyway, let me just say one more thing about classical Hollywood cinema, and then you guys can go do your thing, and I may have something for you on Thursday. For a lot of people, what I've described here is just, well, that's just how a story is. It's got a beginning, it's got a middle, it's got an end, No, that's how we have come to understand story. Okay, it's not a matter of natural history. It's not a matter of something we can't change if we want to, and there are many, many, many films that depart from these conventions. But this is, as I mentioned, an attempt, a quote-unquote, I'm suspicious of the term, but a scientific attempt. I'm not suspicious of science. Science and the humanities is different. So, but it's a quasi-scientific attempt to codify a certain kind of thing so that we can push against it. We can say, well, how does a film sort of fulfill these expectations or not fulfill these expectations? And how are we to understand it, and so on. So it's not just, well, that's what a story is. I mean, we're talking about specific things. So anyway, I'll leave you to the notes, and I'll see if I can post the clip from Viva Las Vegas. And otherwise, that's it for now. Probably be talking to you later in the week.